Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear participants. Welcome to this session of moral lessons from the Quran. The passage that we have selected today is in continuation with the previous day's passage, which is from Surah Ash-Shura. And if you would remember, for those of you who were present last night, that the attributes that we discussed yesterday, which are mentioned in Surah Ash-Shura, relate to some of the individual and collective responsibilities. Passage which is going to be discussed today is from verses 39 to 43 of the same surah. I'm going to read out the text and translation before you. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَصَابَهُمُ الْبَغْيُ هُمْ يَنْتَصِرُونَ وَجَزَاءُ سَيِّئَةٍ سَيِّئَةٌ مِثْلُهَا فَمَنْ عَفَا وَأَصْلَحَ فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الظَّالِمِينَ وَلَمَنِ انْتَصَرَ بَعْدَ ظُلْمِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَا عَلَيْهِم مِّن سَبِيلٍ إنما السبيل على الذين يظلمون الناس ويبغون في الأرض بغير الحق أولئك لهم عذاب أليم ولمن صبر وغفر إن ذلك لمن عزم الأمور. And those who take revenge only when excess is committed against them, and the reward of a sin is an act equal to it. But he who forgave and made amends, then his reward rests with God. God does not like the wrongdoers. And those who take revenge after being wronged incur no blame. Blame is on those who are unjust and are rebellious in the land without any right. It is these people for whom there is a woeful torment. And he who showed patience and forgave, then this is indeed from among lofty traits. So this passage, as you can see, clearly has a single one-point message, and it is very loud and clear. And that is, as far as people who experience wrong being committed against them are concerned, they can, of course, retaliate in equal measure. They can take revenge. But the Quran says that وَلَمَنْ صَبَرَ وَغَفَرَ إِنَّ ذَلِكَ مِنْ عَزْمِ الْأُمُورِ. If they are able to exercise patience and forgive the person who has wronged them, who has inflicted harm on them, then this is something of an outstanding trait, and this is something which is really, really commendable in the eyes of God. So, of course, this is like a situation in which you see we have two basic, I would say, human dispositions. One of these dispositions is that a person, if he has been treated unjustly, if he has been treated wrongly, he or she would like to retaliate that hurt. And the Quran actually gives that person the right to do so by telling him or her that yes, you can retaliate in equal terms, but a higher form of being benevolent is that you forgive that person and you forgo that person. And the beautiful thing here is the Quran says that فَأَجْرُهُ عَلَى اللَّهِ. In case you forgive that person, then don't forget the biggest glad tiding that you can hear is that your reward will be from God. Of course, the implication here is that He is going to reward you manifold, something which is even beyond our imagination. So, of course, we can retaliate in equal measure. We have been given this chance because, you see, at times the hurt caused is so much that if you don't retaliate or you don't pay back in the same way, you are not appeased. And as a result, we find things going out of proportion. So in the times of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and even before him, the tribes were always at war, and the war would often occur on a very small happening. And then the retaliation would be of several multitudes. I mean, it would be like of multiple. If someone has caused a degree of harm which could be caused as one unit in nature, he would or she would be retaliated with something 10 times or maybe 100 times severer. So this would cause a lot of warfare, a lot of bloodshed, and this would continue for several decades, even centuries at times. And we know that this has been happening all over the world as well. So even in the legal terms, the Quran has told us that if you have been wronged, if someone has injured you or wounded you or even killed any of your heirs, then you have the chance to retaliate in equal coins. But if you forgive, then that is something which is greatly rewarding. So we have both these options available, but the recommended option, as you can clearly see once again from these Quranic verses, is that if you inflict the same amount of harm to the other person, then this is something which cannot be, regarded as blameworthy. So the Quran says, فَأُولَٰئِكَ مَا عَلَيْهِم مِّن سَبِيلٍ, which means that if they take revenge, then this will not incur any blame on them. Actual blame will be on the person who are unjust and rebellious in the land. إِنَّمَا السَّبِيلُ عَلَى الَّذِينَ يَظْلِمُونَ النَّاسَ وَيَبْغُونَ فِي الْأَرْضِ بِغَيْرِ الْحَقِّ. They show rebellion without any justification. And it is said that أُولَٰئِكَ لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ, that it is for such people for whom there is a woeful torment, of course, referring to the fact that in the hereafter they would be receiving, or they would be given a very severe punishment. So, my dear viewers, this is something of a ordeal that we often face, because one of the things that often bothers us is that when we have been wronged in a severe way, if we have been harmed in a severe way, if people mock at us, if they make fun of us, if they deride us, it's extremely difficult to forgive such people. But you see, this is what God wants us to do, that if we can forgive them, if we are able to forgive them, and this is one of the most noblest gestures that we can do. And the forgiveness, the trait of forgiveness, if you can call it, is such that this can only be gained if we have a very strong connection with God. Because you see, this forgiveness, the inspiration for this forgiveness, I would say, comes from God. Because it is He who has promised us a reward of many-fold. And if we are able to have that strong God connection, then we have that inner strength in us to forgive people. Forgiveness is not a sign of weakness at all. At times we do think that, well, it is a sign of weakness, and people would say that, well, look at this person, he could not even protect himself or herself. This is not the case. Forgiveness is something which requires a lot of courage. It's something which is like controlling that inner urge in you to talk back to a person whom you were justifiably given the right to talk back in harsh terms, or to retaliate in harsh terms. So it needs a lot of patience. It needs a lot of self-discipline, and there is nothing better for this self-discipline in us to be inculcated than this beautiful month of Ramadan. The patience we learn, the perseverance we learn, how we control ourselves. All of us know when we are passing through a fast, particularly when it's a very hot day or we are exposed to the elements of nature, the amount of restraint that we have to exercise is quite a lot. And therefore, we can clearly see how this month actually inculcates this patience in us. And precisely for this reason, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam would fast in other months as well. So the month of Ramadan for him would be a month of patience, a month of perseverance, which of course is what the Quran says when it refers to it by the words لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. Now taqwa is the result of that patience. Yes, taqwa means to remain in your limits, to not exceed limits, and this can only happen if we have that patience in ourselves. So Prophet Muhammad always, we are told by his beloved wife Aisha, that he would fast for three optional days in other months of Ramadan as well, and they would be at times the 13th, 14th, and 15th of each lunar month, and at times it would be different. And this is just to emphasize the point that just as we have optional prayers, we pray nawafil. Similarly, these nafil fasts, or these optional fasts, they not only, of course, have their own benefits, but they also are able to instill in us this tremendous quality, which is the quality of patience. And do remember the fact that the Quran has iterated at a number of instances, especially in Surah Dahar, it says, "Jazahum bima sabaru jannatan wa harira," that it is basically this patience which is going to reward a person with the life of paradise, because you exercise control for the sake of God. So in order to forgive people, as this verse has said in a very beautiful way, and it has inspired us in a way that God is going to give us the reward of showing forgiveness, then we have to have that patience. Also important, my dear participants, is the fact that we are very weak people. We have this habit of exceeding the limits at times, and we do cross the limits. It's in spite of trying to restrain ourselves. So how many a time we do so, and we keep asking for forgiveness from the Almighty. And such is the proclivity of the Almighty that He has said that it is as if He is waiting for a person to ask for forgiveness, and He is someone who would like to forgive the person who has made amends and also felt sorry and done the needful. And on one occasion, He has said that people who commit sins in frenzy and then immediately ask for forgiveness, it is incumbent, the words are, it is mandatory upon him. He says that it's mandatory upon me to forgive such a person. So you see, this is what the Almighty Himself is like. He is prone to forgiveness. He likes to forgive people, and to Him, it is not the sin which counts as much as the attitude one adopts after one sin. So, in a similar vein, on similar grounds, we ourselves should take the cue, and also, as we often discuss, that all these qualities and all these attributes which are mentioned in the Quran, they are not just mentioned to introduce the Almighty. They are mentioned so that we, in our own capacity, try to adopt those attributes. So, if God is merciful, He is compassionate, He is kind. Of course, we just cannot match in any way His compassion, His mercy, His forgiveness. But the reason that these attributes are mentioned are that we have to try and our best to adopt a small portion as much as we can. And forgiveness, which is of course mentioned in the Quran as in various ways as the attribute of God, like Ghaffar, like Ghafoor, like Rahim, like Rahman. So all these words signify mercy and forgiveness in one sense or the other. And we come across these attributes every now and then in the Quran. And it is the best lesson that we can draw from these attributes, that we have to learn to be a person who is forgiving, learn to be a person who is willing to forgo, and if ever there is a need that we have to take revenge or retaliate in any way, because there are instances, then it should not and never exceed the amount of harm that has been afflicted on us, because this would be outright injustice. So there is an ideal which has been set by the Quran, and then there is a step below that. It is just like what the Quran has alluded to at other instances by the terms of adl and ihsan, justice and goodness. So justice is to treat someone equally in a way that is commensurate with the norms of fairness. And ihsan, or something which is of the nature of goodness, would mean that you are a step ahead, and you would like to go ahead and not only treat that person justly, but in such a magnanimous way, in such a way that the other person feels that he or she has been done a great favor. So let us learn from these attributes of the Almighty, and let us try to make our lives as much I would say forgiving as is possible for others. We have to learn to forgive in order to be forgiven. And forgiveness is a trait that if we are able to inculcate in us through patience and through our connection with God, believe me, you'll feel a very light-hearted person. It makes you a person who is at peace with himself or herself. When we are in rage, when we are in frenzy, when we are angry, it's the biggest harm that we are doing to our own selves. When we are forgiving, when we have this quality of forgiveness in ourselves, you'll find that we are at peace with ourselves. It would be as if we would have elevated ourselves and tried our best to come as close to God as possible. So with these words, I end my talk today on these verses, and I'm now available for your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. Before we reach out to the raised hands, I have a written question. In prayer, we praise Allah, ask Him for His mercy, and seek His help and ask for His forgiveness. But why do we recite Surah Lahab in prayer, as it is dedicated to cursing of Abu Lahab and his wife? Why do we need to recite this surah in prayer? What benefits will we get from this surah if we recite it? That's the question.
First of all, the translation of the surah is often wrongly done, which makes which gives us this impression that we are cursing Abu Lahab. So the words "tabbat yada abi lahabin wa tab," they are not words of curse at all. In Arabic, when you say "tabballak," which means curse on you, is something which actually means cursing someone. But when we say tabbat yada abi lahab, which means the hands of Abu Lahab, they are broken, this is actually referring to, it is like a metaphorical expression which refers to the fact that the power of Abu Lahab is now stands decimated and destroyed. He was the greatest enemy of God. He was the one who instilled a lot of enmity amongst the Quraysh against the Prophet, and he was the one who died a very bitter death. So it was not in response to any curse, as is generally understood. And I think I've lectured on this topic as well elsewhere, or written somewhere on it as well. And the person can consult that in detail. But it is a gross misinterpretation to think that these are words of curse. They are actually words of prediction, because this is a Meccan surah, and Abu Lahab was the chief of the Quraysh, and he was to be crowned king had the Prophet not come. And he was challenged the most by the Prophet. He thought that his own superiority was at stake, and so it was his power and his strength that was pitted against the Muslims. So in the Meccan surah, the Prophet is being assured that don't worry, that the way they are challenging you and the way that they are pitted against you and doing all sorts of things to undermine your mission, they are not going to stay there forever, and they are going to meet their fate. So it's basically an expression of telling us that he is going to meet his fate. Remember, the words are his hands are broken. And in ancient scriptures, when you say that his hands are broken, it actually refers to the fact that the support that he has of his companions and his brothers and his tribes, they are going to be no longer there. So I would suggest to this person that please have a recourse to the tafsir of preferably Ustaz Amin Islahi and Ustaz Javed Ghamidi of Surah Lahab, and they'll explain this to you, that how this is not a word of curse at all.
Thank you. Fatma, you can ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum.
Well,
I want to know that is making a badwa for somebody allowed in Islam? Like if somebody has hurt you, can you like give them a badwa?
yes, technically, if someone has hurt you, you can make that. You can retaliate in equal terms, and if someone has done what you cannot actually exact revenge in the same manner. So if you pray to God that let it happen, that God, you do the same thing which I could not have done, it is perfectly allowed. It's an equal retaliation, except that the prayer that such a prayer should not exceed whatever harm that you have suffered. It should be a prayer which should say that the person should be inflicted the same harm as that person had afflicted myself.
Thank you. Rohan, you may have your question now.
All right, thank you. Sir, I want to ask that in दुआ कुनूत उसके अंदर एक पार्ट आता है जिसका मफहूम ये है कि तेरी नाफरमानी करने वालों से अलग रहते हैं और उन्हें छोड़ देते हैं. I want to ask the meaning of this, because like सबके साथ तो मिलकर रहना चाहिए चाहे कोई कितना भी गुनाहगार हो. तो can you please explain that?
Yes, actually the words are وَنَخْلَوْ وَنَتْرُكُ مَنْ يَفْجُرُكَ, which means that people who are defiant to you, people who are openly defiant to God, and they defy and are disobedient to Him, then we would not be like to part or live in the company of such people. So this is something of a stress which needs to be understood. It doesn't mean that you have to break relations with them. It is like saying that I'm not going to live in the company of people, for example, who are drunkards or people who openly disobey the Almighty. So one thing is to befriend them and to live in their company. This is what is being stopped from here. And another thing is to have relations with them, and especially relations in which you can maybe make a difference in their lives, or if that is not the case, then at least wish them by whenever you meet them by saying Assalamu alaikum. So this is something which is not against this verse, this dua at all. All that it says is that you should not, befriend or make friends or enjoy the company of such people and start living like what they are doing, and you start doing yourselves as well.
Thank you. Aisha, you may ask your question now.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum salam.
I have heard that when the Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam went for a Miraj, he heard the footsteps of Bilal radiallah in paradise, because Bilal radiallah would always say 2 rakah tahiyatul wudu after making wudu. So between Asr and Maghrib, Nafal prayers are forbidden. So can we say that before Maghrib? This is the first part. And the second part is, when I went for Hajj, I saw people around me, they were saying prayers after the Maghrib prayers, but before Ikama, they were saying 2 rakat prayer. When I asked them what prayers those were, they couldn't really answer because they weren't English speaking. So what prayer was that? Thank you.
First of all, as far as praying between Asr and Maghrib is concerned, it is absolutely fine. This is a misconception which has arisen that perhaps we cannot pray between Asr and Maghrib. And the reason for this misconception is that in the times of Prophet Muhammad, there were no watches, of course, in which you could tell exact time. And the forbidden part of the prayer, of praying, is at sunrise and sunset. So the times of sunrise and sunset are the forbidden times of doing sajda or praying. So, because there was a chance that people might pray very close to sunset, so the Prophet at times remarked that, well, you should be careful. And there are other narrations in this which clearly say that if you are absolutely sure that it is not sunset time and the sun is still up, there is no harm in praying. So basically, we need to understand that it was a precautionary measure that was given in those times in the absence of watches, and it was all the chance that people might pray right at the time of sunset without realizing that it's sunset time, and this is a time when prostration or namaz or prayer is forbidden. So if we are clearly sure that it is not sunset time, then any prayer can be offered between the Asr and the time of sunset. And in all probability, people who were offering that prayer, which some people in various parts of the world called as the Awwabin prayer, they were the ones who were offering those nafils. Although we don't have any proof from the Prophet that he used to offer these prayers, but technically any prayer which is before sunset, the time of sunset, can be offered. And of course, they would be offering that prayer. Regarding your question on Miraj and the details which are, of course, presented in this during this journey, these details are mostly in Hadith literature, as you would be knowing, and if you have heard in detail some of the views that we have expressed, or the Farai school has expressed on regarding Miraj, you would be familiar with the fact that this was basically a spiritual journey. It was something that took place in a dream, and the Qur'an itself calls it a dream. So whatever happened in that dream was of symbolic in nature. It was symbolism, and that symbolism had something to communicate. But then, of course, that would need some more time to clarify, and I would refer you to some of the lectures and talks that our moderators might refer you to, in which it has been shown that this Miraj, or the ascension, was basically a spiritual journey in which whatever he was shown had a symbolic significance. Just as when we see things in a dream, they are symbolic and they are not to be taken literally. So the only difference between our dreams and the dreams of prophets of God is that for the prophets of God, they are shown true dreams, and for them, dreams are actually a means of instruction and education.
Thank you, Dr. Suhail. You may have your question now.
Dr. Saleem, Assalamu alaikum. Once again, thank you for your brilliant talk today. My question is about today is about eternal damnation, the punishment of being put into hell for all eternity of time, and a question about it. Now, I'm aware that the traditional school of majority of Muslim scholars, when they talk about eternal damnation, they take it literally, that it is eternal damnation for the people who deserve to be eternally damned. But I know two caveats, and I know that they are in minority. One is from Imam Taymiyyah and his student Imam Jazavi, who mentions that the word abada used in these ayats is metaphorical, and actually it's not eternal punishment for any group of people. And to my knowledge, the second minority view in this is Farai school, and I've heard you talk and Ghamidi talk about it, Surah Hud, in which there are some ayats which say that Allah can, if He wants, hell might not be for eternity, where heaven is for eternity. So barring these two caveats, which are in the minority view, which groups of people do you think would be eternally damned? And before you answer that question, can you explain to me the definition of three words: mushrik, kafir, and non-believer? Sorry, four words: mushrik, kafir, non-believer, and non-Muslim. Can you define those four words for me, please, before you tell me the groups that will be eternally damned in hell?
So, mushrik is a person who adopts idolatry or shirk as religion by knowing that he is doing shirk. So, for example, you cannot call a Christian a mushrik because he or she would say that, well, I'm a monotheist and I believe in one God. And if you think that I'm a mushrik, then you have wrongly understood. So it's basically one's own view of the religion that he or she would adopt regarding multiple or singular gods that would account for. So the idolaters of Arabia, they would actually adopt multiple gods, and they would say that yes, we believe in several gods. So in other words, a person who himself admits to believe in several gods is the one who is called a mushrik. And a person who might be, someone who to us apparently does believe in more than one god, but he himself calls himself to be a monotheist, will never be called a mushrik, or should not be called a mushrik. And this is the lesson which Quran has taught us, by not calling at a single instance in the Quran, not a single instance can we quote in which the people of the book are called mushrik, because they themselves liked to be called monotheists, or they thought that they are monotheists, and the Quran respected their view in spite of the fact they said that this is a blatant form of polytheism. So this is how we would say a mushrik is. So mushrik means a person who willfully adopts polytheism as religion. As far as disbelief, as a kafir is concerned, well, a kafir is a person who intentionally denies the basic truths. Like, for example, who intentionally denies the accountability in the hereafter, who intentionally denies God in any way, or who intentionally denies the fact that there is going to be any hereafter, or who denies a messenger of God. So any person who intentionally, out of, deliberate, willful intention, denies something, that person is called a kafir. So, and the other two I think you asked about was non-Muslim. So non-Muslim is just a plain word which just refers to an entity or a person who is not a Muslim, whatever he be. And what was the fourth term that you asked?
Non-believer.
So non-believer also is traditionally used, synonymously as a person who is non-Muslim. So the word non-Muslim and non-believer, they are not religious terms. They are terms that we have coined, and generally they are used synonymously. But of course, because of the fact that we have coined them, so it also depends on the context. But the first two terms are terms of the Quran, and therefore I can, regarding them, I can define clearly that what a mushrik and a kafir is. And then regarding your question that who are the people who are worthy of eternal damnation, the Quran has actually spelled this out at a number of places, and I respectfully disagree with Imam Ibn Taymiyyah and his student when they say that abada is used as a metaphor or something of a symbolic a symbol in nature, because you see at a number of occasions the words used by the Quran are not just abada. It says khalidina fiha abada, which leaves no room to interpret the fact that they are not going to be eternally damned. Khalidina is something which says Khalid means something which is eternal. Abada is something which further emphasizes and tells, well, this eternity itself is going to be eternal, so to speak. So an eternity which is eternal, such is the emphasis. Now, what Ghamidi Sahib has actually said, he is not refuting in any way this eternal damnation. What he is saying is that the way there are certain verses which in Surah Hud, the way they are mentioned, this could show that there could be a time in which hell would cease to exist. And ma damat is samawatu wal ard, the way they are expressed in the Quran, this would mean that the people who would be eternally damned, one day they might just finish off, and hell just ceases to exist. And when this is said, it would just mean that they're gone, they're kaput. So that's a third, I would say, third interpretation, which is different from the traditional interpretation, and also different from the Ibn Taymiyyah's interpretation. And as far as eternal damnation is concerned, the crimes which make a person eligible for eternal damnation, if you just pick out all these verses which say khalidina fiha abada, khalidina fiha abada, you'll find them that they are mostly, it is mostly arrogance which makes a person deny a certain truth, which includes a messenger of God. So this is how you'll find, and you can do this exercise yourself, that just pick out the words khalidina fiha abada, where both of these are mentioned, and you'll see that most of the people, or most of the criminals which are under discussion who deserve this punishment, are ones who have intentionally, out of arrogance, in spite of being convinced that there is something that they're facing is the truth, they outrightly denied it.
Okay. As always, obviously, when you're talking to someone, the terminology and the words you use, the syntax and the syllabus is so important, because if you're not talking about the same thing, it always causes controversies and disruptions. So the 4 words that I ask you to clarify in the beginning are the 4 common words that I use when these eternal damnation or punishment is discussed. So if you talk to a non-Muslim, I mean, the word non-Muslim at the moment, we consider it, or most people will consider it, as someone who's not under the Muhammadian law. But from the definition of Muslim, from the Farahi school and from the Quran, a Muslim can easily be a Jew or a Christian. They are defined as Muslims. Would my understanding be correct? So when we say non-Muslims will go to hell, or if you face an angry Christian, his most common argument would be, oh, you guys believe that non-Muslims will go to hell. It's actually not true, because we are not saying non-Muslims will go to hell, because we are defining Muslims as all monotheistic followers. Would my understanding be correct?
Yes, absolutely correct.
Okay, well, that's fine. So that's clarified. Now, which then brings me to the first 2 words again, kafir and an idolater. I said mushrik and a kafir. So mushrik is very clear, a person who believes in multiple deities. But a kafir is, would you say a kafir is a person who could be a mushrik, but also denies the basic tenets that are related to God? Is that what you meant by a kafir?
Yes, you see, the element of intentional denial creeps into the word disbeliever. The word kafara, or the verb kafar, actually means to hide something and to engulf something with a cover. That's the root meaning. But kafir means someone who intentionally denies the truth. And all mushriks are kafirs, but not all kafirs are mushriks. So this is another thing that you might need to know. But what the important part is that we just cannot regard any non-Muslim to be a kafir summarily and dismiss him by saying that whatever is mentioned regarding non-Muslims in the Quran is the same as what is mentioned regarding kafirs. The word kafir in many cases, in most cases I would say, wherever the punishment is mentioned for them is referring to a particular category of non-Muslims of the times of the Prophet Muhammad only, who had deliberately denied and therefore had become liable to punishment. And the fact that their deliberate denial is something that was diagnosed, again, is something which I have been explaining a number of times, that this was again not the job of the Prophet himself. It was the Almighty who would communicate the fact that, well, now you have done enough. Now the people against you are deliberately denying. There's no room left for any improvement, and they are now deliberately denying, because you see, deliberate denial is something which rests in the heart. I mean, it's like something which is in your intention. You just cannot judge a person from outside whether he is deliberately denying or not. So in the times of prophets of God, deliberate denial was something which could be diagnosed, not even by prophets, but by the Almighty. And because the institution of Wahi was there, so through Wahi, the Almighty would communicate to his prophets that now you have done enough. Now the person or the people in front of you are guilty of deliberate denial. So that is why they became liable to certain punishments. Later on, once prophets of God have left us, I mean, after the Prophet Muhammad, he was the last of those prophets. Today also, there could be people around us who could be kafirs, which mean that they are intentionally denying, but we have no means to pinpoint them. Because in the times of Prophet Muhammad and the previous prophets, it was God who was pinpointing them and bringing this information in the knowledge of the prophets, because this is something which only God can pinpoint and know. Today, in the absence of any such communication with God, in spite of the fact that there could be non-Muslims today who would be deliberately denying and guilty of the fact, but we have no means of knowing them. And secondly, we don't have a prophet of God to deliver the truth to them in such a manner that if they deny it, then they'll become labeled as kafir. So to be a kafir, you have to have two things: the presence of a messenger of God, and then in spite of his presence and communication of the truth, they end up deliberately denying that prophet. So these two things are not available in the post-prophetic period. So therefore today, even if people are deliberately denying, we just cannot pinpoint them because we have no means to know who they are. All we know is that there are just two categories: Muslims or non-Muslims. And for all non-Muslims, we just cannot use the term of kafir for them. This would be outright misunderstanding the Quran.
Nusrat Khwaja, you can go first.
Yeah, I have a brief question. Dr. Sahab, I know Ghamidi Saab team was working on hadith, the collection of hadith. Is it done already, or how will it be available? Will it be on the website, or it'll be available in the book form?
Well, it's available on the website and also published in the journals every month, but it'll take a long time to be completed. I think we've just done about maybe 25 to 30% of the work in about 5 years, and it would need another 10 to 15 years, inshallah, if God permits us to complete the work, and perhaps then it will be started to get printed in book form. But the work which has been done, I think at least 60% of the work that has been done is already published in various installments in the journals.
Is it in Ishraq or?
It's in Ishraq and in Renaissance, both of these journals.
Thank you, Shiraz Ahmed. You may have your question now.
No, Shehzad bhai, Suhail Saab earlier on asked a question about the 4 terms, and I'm going to focus on the 2 terms, right? One is kafir, one is mushrik. Quran even not declared, but called even Muslims kafir, after the second battle that they had, that on that day, they were more close to kufr as compared to iman, right? When they didn't listen to the Prophet properly. So it's my understanding about the term that kafir is about swaying away from the message. Now, whether you are doing it intentionally or unintentionally is something that God is going to judge on Judgment Day. But you can be a Muslim, a proclaiming Muslim, but in the sight of God, you can be kafir based upon your actions. So who is truly a kafir and who is not? Only God can, suggest that. So is this understanding correct? That kafir is defined by your actions along with your intentions, which only God can know.
I get your point. You see, you have to make a distinction between the verb kafara and the adjective kafir. So the verse that you are referring to is hum yawmaizin lil kufr. They were close to kufr on that day. So to be close to kufr is to say that someone is close to disbelief. In spite of being a believer, someone can be close to disbelief. Like, for example, if I'm a believer and I go to a saint's grave and start prostrating before him, I would be doing something kufr, but that act is not going to make me a kafir. So there is a very fine line which Imam Farahi has actually pointed out here, and it needs some elaboration, which inshallah I might do, but I'll try to explain it very briefly. that the verb kafara, when it occurs, is entirely a different thing to what the word kafir, which is an adjective, which is an ismul file. So kafara means an instance of kufr, which can even emanate from a believer. And kafir is someone who has adopted disbelief as a belief, I would say, disbelief as a belief. So there is this small distinction, and if you can go through the Quran, you'll make this distinction that even the people of the book are called kafar. I mean, the word kafara is used for them at instances. Similarly for mushrik, but you'll find that whenever the word kafir is used, which is like an adjective, it is only used when that deliberate denial is taken upon oneself as something which one knows clearly. So I would suggest that you study the Quran and underline the words wherever it occurs as a verb and wherever it occurs as a noun or an adjective. So that is how the distinction is made. But of course, there are some other details which we can discuss maybe tomorrow or in one of the coming sessions.
Sure. Now, Shehzad, about the word mushrik, thank you for elaboration on that. About the word mushrik, right? It's my understanding, which can be totally wrong, that's why I'm asking you, that even in the sense where a certain community considers more than one god to be part of the system, even the mushrikeen in Makkah weren't like that. They believed in one God, Allah, who is the creator of the heavens and the earth, who's the sustainer, everything and all that. Along with that, they considered certain personalities like angels who are close enough to God that no matter what our deeds are, if we please these certain people, they will ending up doing shifarish in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and get the job done for us. So in that certain true sense of, let's say, Hinduism, where you have Vishnu or you have Brahma or you have other gods, so they don't believe that there are three different gods who are running the show of this universe. As per Quran is very explicit. They believed in one true God like you and I do, theoretically speaking, but in their practical day-to-day activities, they relied on creations of that God, which they even labeled as daughters or whatever, whom they think can get the job done for us. We Muslims today hold a large group of us similar beliefs. So isn't the word mushrik in Quran used as an identification because they used to identify themselves as such, whereas the polytheism, as far as conceptual polytheism is concerned, does not require us to believe in multiple almighties. There is only one almighty, even for mushrikeen in Makkah, but to act in our day-to-day life and rely on other creatures that they can get the job done forcefully or through God, no matter what our actions are. Do you disagree with this?
I understand your view, but you see, this is not the view of the Quran. The Quran actually has cited these mushrikun at several instances in which they say that we worship other gods so that they bring us closer to you. So the 365 idols which were placed in the holy Kaaba, each of them were worshipped separately, and the Quran has actually named them as Waddam, Waswa, and Yahus. These are the names of some of the deities which they worship separately. Yes, they thought that God was the supreme God. The only thing is that they thought that Allah is the supreme God, but the rest are semi or demigods, and they used to worship them the way they used to worship God. So, and this is entirely different from the Hindu concept, because in Hinduism we have the Trimurti, in which Brahma, Vishnu, and Krishna, they are the three gods. And Hinduism itself started off with the creed of monotheism. You'll not find any multiple gods. It was only in later scriptures that they crept in. Otherwise, as far as the idolaters or the mushrikun of Arabia are concerned, I would suggest you, if you could look up Ustaz Amin Islahi's Haqiqat-e-Shirk wa Tawheed, is a book that he wrote, and in which he has enlisted the forms of their shirk that they did, and they willingly said that yes, we worship the jinn. So you'll find a verse in the Quran in which it says Ya'budun al-jinn. They used to worship the jinn. They used to worship daughters of angels as daughters of God. They used to worship their saints. So he has made a list of all those verses in which the types of polytheism that they were guilty of is enumerated, and that is why the Quran has actually given them the title of al-mushrikun, which it never gave the people of the book, in spite of the fact that we know that they believed Jesus to be the Son of God. So the title of al-mushrikun was only given to them because they deliberately, willfully, and intentionally thought that there are more than one God. They thought that Allah is the supreme God, but then the rest are his subservient to him, but they do serve a certain purpose.
Thank you, Dr. Shehzad. That's the end of the questions for today.
Okay. Hafiz.